I would like, one example that comes in often in my mind. When I went on a mission in South Africa for my church, with the intention of converting as many people as we could, and of course, we were told if a black person comes to the door, that you just hand them a pamphlet and say goodbye. We weren't there to convert black people. Nevertheless, a few here and there did join the church. And one of the saddest examples that I ever came across was a family of people who were church members, and there were three beautiful girls. Well, there were five girls in the family. Three of them were already past teenagers, and they were very gung ho about the church. They wanted to move to the United States and become, part of the central church organization, and their father was doing genealogical research, which was an important part of being a good member of that church. And he discovered that about five generations back, they had a black ancestor, and he immediately reported this to the church officials, and he was told that he shouldn't move his family to the central, where the church organization was strong. He was told that he shouldn't practice the priesthood, even though he'd been given it, and it was one of the most heartbreaking things that I've ever seen, watching that family deal with the fact that they were subject to the curse of Cain, just because five generations before there had been a black person in. I mean, this is an extreme example, but this kind of thing was not unknown, and it just, to me, it is so impossible to reconcile that with a church that claims to be divinely inspired and to have divine authority to practice their
So that
beliefs.
weighed on your conscience for quite a while.
It did. It was one of the things that really got me thinking seriously about where I stood in relation to religion, and ultimately led me to come to depend on literature for truth, because I didn't have to carry that kind of burden of reconciling things that I knew were absolutely immoral with what was supposed to be spiritual guidance.
And I think your experience in South Africa was probably 1959, 58 or 59.
It was 1956 to 58.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And so you watched with Mom, I guess, eagerly through the 60s, the whole civil rights movement that transpired.
Well, you know, I was pretty unaware of what was going on at first. I guess, like most people that didn't live in the South, southern United States, it didn't have a lot of reality to me, other than this kind of experience that I had, which did weigh heavily on me. But it's didn't. I didn't realize how widespread that discrimination was, and what the terrible consequences were for especially American society, but Canadian society to some degree, and other places in the world as well. And when I look back now, when I see new, when I see TV shows and read stuff about what life was like for black people in that period and previous to it, I just find it horrible. I can hardly bear. I can hardly bear to think that it took me so long to wake up to what was happening and how wrong it was. And I blame religion for that. If it hadn't been for the reading that I was doing and my exposure to other people who were reading literature and using that as their source of truth and understanding, I probably never would have awakened to that, those factors that were so hard to accept.
What role did the Vietnam War have in your experience in the 1960s?
Well, I went to the University of Washington as part of their PhD program, and when I went, I was very uncomfortable about the war in Vietnam, but again, I wasn't confronted with the reality of it until I got to Seattle, and among other things, I found I had male students in my classes who used to come and beg me to raise their mark in English. I was teaching a course, first-year course in English, and they begged me to raise their mark because if I gave them a low mark, it would be the deciding factor that would make them eligible for the draft. And that really forced me to think very seriously about what was the meaning of that war. And I started going to hear speakers about it, and I started doing a lot of reading about it, and I came to the conclusion that it was totally unnecessary war. It was totally useless, and that American society was falling apart morally because they were forcing people to go and fight in a war that they did not believe in either. And unfortunately, the church that I grew up in was a gung-ho supporter of the war. They were totally in favor of it. They totally believed the bullshit about communism. This would be a big step on the road to communism taking over the world. And you see something like that that's so wrong. It's pretty hard to give much credence to notions that the church is being guided by direct revelation from God.
I think the idea of a domino theory was plausible in many people's minds because they just gone through the experience of appeasing Hitler and what a mistake that was. So I think it was a plausible and honest mistake, I guess, in retrospect. But I think what really wasn't seen is that the different factions within communism itself would have ended up fighting each other. Like the Chinese and the Russians were only allies when they had a common enemy. They had a kind of intrinsic motive to not to work together, and it couldn't have really spread as a unified bloc.
Yeah, with that, I mean, I agree with that, but that's a level of subtlety that was pretty much beyond the average American and Canadian citizen to understand. So I guess my quarrel is with religious organizations that promoted it.
Did you go on marches? You and Mom went on anti-war marches?
I didn't go on any marches. I went to a lot of rallies and so on.